Sorry about that. Sorry about the interruption. Anyway, just to explain, Paul is from New England, from Massachusetts. He's a politician over in that state. He represents a part of Massachusetts that's out in the western part of the state. And he's got a background, started off in industry, in the telecoms industry, and then has degrees in law and business, and has a particular interest in employee ownership. And I think really it's probably best if I let Mark, so Paul's got a really interesting name. I get it confused. I have to apologize. It's Paul Mark,
yes.
Not Mark Paul.
No,
Paul Mark.
I get that. I get that every single day.
So over to you, Paul.
Well, thank you, William, for having me here. It's been really exciting touring around a couple of places with you. And I've been lucky to know you now for a couple of years. We met over in the United States, and it's been great coming over here, meeting with you up in Scotland, meeting with you in London, going to the House of Lords in the past, and really learning more about what's going on over here in the United Kingdom and how it compares to what's going on in Massachusetts and the United States. And so, yeah, I'm a member of the Massachusetts House of Representatives. There's actually 160 of us and 40 senators, and we are the state government for Massachusetts. And before I worked in the legislature, before I first ran for office, I worked at the telephone company, Verizon. I was a lineman, so one of the guys that goes up and climbs the poles and runs wires, that kind of thing. Had a technical background, and they had this really great tuition plan, and the tuition plan allowed for us to go back to college. And so I went and I got all these degrees and a law degree, and there I was, a telephone repairman with a law degree and a doctoral degree, and a seat opened up in the House of Representatives. And so people said to me, well, why don't you run? You know so much, put your money where your mouth is. And so we tried, and you look on this map, you can see that that's Massachusetts in relationship to the United States, one of the smaller states, but one of the older states, and probably one of the better educated workforces. And if you look in Massachusetts at the second map, where we have the breakdown by counties, I represent 16 communities in Berkshire and Franklin counties. Franklin, named for Benjamin Franklin, not William Franklin. And in those communities, I represent cities, population of about 44,000 people, and another city with a population of about 18,000 people, and then also communities as small as 120 people. And a town I live in, it's called Peru, Massachusetts, named after the region of South America, and there's about 850 people. And so we're one of the more rural areas in 14 of my communities, and we're often feeling left behind by maybe the quick pace of the urban centers in not just Massachusetts, but in the entire region. And so one of the things we're always looking for is, how do we keep and retain talent? How do we attract people to stay in Western Massachusetts and rural Massachusetts and in Massachusetts in general? And you were mentioning some of my background. So when I was a kid, I was about 12 years old, and back then you didn't have cell phones or email or anything like that. My mother, my sister, and I were sitting on the couch and we're watching the television. An announcement came that the warehouse where my father worked was going to close down, and this was the day before Christmas Eve. So he had no opportunity to tell us. It was on the news before, and it was really devastating. By the time he got back and told us in person, it was tough. And we had a tough couple of years. And so one of the things I've thought about is an organization that's employee owned is less likely to do something like that, because there's more consideration for the workers and the community and keeping jobs reliable. This was a company that had sold out to a bigger company, and it just closed shop and moved out of town, and that was it. And you're on your own, figure it out. So some of the work we've been doing here in Massachusetts focused on employee ownership. When I first got into office, I met with different people who worked at cooperatives and employee-owned businesses and different organizations, and we asked, what's the number one thing we could do to try to help encourage this model, sustainable model, employee-owned model? And the gentleman at the time, his name is Chris Mackin, and he actually has connections with people over here in the UK, have heard of him, and I've talked about him with them. He suggested to us that there has been an office in the Massachusetts state government called the Massachusetts Office of Employee Involvement and Ownership. And that office existed from the 1980s until the Great Recession in 2008, where state budgets, tax revenues were really down, and so they were looking for what they call low-hanging fruit to kind of cut out of the budget, and this was one of the things that got zeroed out. So when I got into office in 2011, that became one of my priorities, was how do we start this business back up? How do we start this organization back up that's going to help businesses transition? And it took 7 years. 7 years of me filing a budget amendment in the state budget before finally I had a partner in the Senate who was willing to pick that up from Cape Cod area. His name is Senator Julian Sear. And his involvement, his reason for caring about this so much was his family business, which I believe was a restaurant. When his father and mother decided they wanted to retire, they wanted to start looking ahead to the future, they didn't have a plan on how they were going to, keep the business going, how they were going to transfer that ownership. And so he heard about this program from a friend of his that lived in his district and, jumped right on board and became a really great partner and a really great ally. And so I'm really, really happy to say that now for the first time in over 10 years, that office is back up and running in the state of Massachusetts.
Back in your own backyard in Western Massachusetts, I think there's a couple of businesses that we may well have heard of as well, that I understand are employee owned already.
Yeah. In Massachusetts, probably the bigger companies, and you can see it on the slide, Ocean Spray, Cranberries, and Fruit. That's a pretty big company. That's employee owned and it's farmer owned as well. So agricultural employees, getting into the ownership of their own products and the distribution and such. And then Harpoon Brewery. I don't know if it comes over here, but in New England, in a lot of the United States, Harpoon's a pretty widely known brewery. Really, high quality, not quite craft. I would say more distribution than craft, but certainly the high quality standards of a craft beer. And Cape Air is an airline, a local regional airline that's pretty successful in Massachusetts. Out where I represent in Western Massachusetts in the Connecticut River Valley, a lot of cooperatives. It can be food stores, it can be convenience stores, it can be clothes stores, it can be any kind of business really. And they've really, again, tried to thrive with that, where maybe access to capital and access to high tech industries isn't as easy to come by as it is in Boston and the surrounding area. And when you look in the United States, the biggest employee-owned company in the entire United States is actually Publix, which is a supermarket chain and has over 190,000 employees, and they're very successful. They're located in the southeast of the U.S.
Paul, I think following on from your success in getting the office restored, you're now seeking to bring new legislation within the state. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, so having achieved that success now, we're looking at what could be the next level, what could be the next thing we could do to really help. And an idea came to me. It's actually, I think, modeled over what's going on here in the UK with the employee ownership trust idea and the tax benefits that came in legislation in the last 10 years. So the bill I filed, H3731, an act to create and sustain jobs through development of employee-owned businesses and cooperatives. The idea of that is to also offer capital gains tax breaks for businesses, business owners, companies that decide to sell their ownership interest and stock to employee-owned models instead. So it would allow for capital gains tax break, as well as tax breaks on loans, interest charged on loans to people who are acquiring a loan to try to gain ownership as employees in the company. And so this is something that I think it developed out of Rutgers University, and some people I met at a conference met me, had heard of some of the work I was doing, and fed me some language that they had used in the state of Maine. So we had to take the Maine language and kind of translate it into Massachusetts appropriate language, and we did that, and this was filed by me in the House of Representatives in January and then officially filed in May. So it goes to what we call the Labor and Workforce Development Committee. It'll have a hearing, and if this passed, again, this is another opportunity for people that are looking to get into this model, but maybe considering what's in their best financial interest, while they're also trying to do the right thing for the future, for the community, and for the employees. And something like this can make it a little bit, more attractive to people trying to get into that.
Paul, I think you've done some research, haven't you, or regarding the number of baby boomers who are approaching the age of 70 and the consequences that might have. And do you want to tell us what?
Yeah, in the United States, the estimate is 10,000 people every single day for the next 10 years are going to turn 70. And so a percentage of those people, of course, are business owners. And it's estimated that in this baby boomer class, that's going to be nearing retirement age very, very soon, if not already. There's over 2.3 million businesses with over 24.7 million employees and over $5.14 trillion in sales. And the most disturbing stat I'm going to throw out there is that 80% of these businesses have no succession plan in place. And so what we find is that in the United States, the problem is nobody's thought about how is this going to happen. Maybe some of them have assumed a son, a daughter are going to take over the business at some point, or maybe someone that's been working there. But for the most part, when it's actually time to transition, either the business owner hasn't thought it through, or the people they think are going to take over really aren't looking to do such a thing. And so with the Office of Employee Involvement and Ownership, that's the idea, is how do we help facilitate such a thing? How do we give business owners and employees, how do we give them the knowledge and the skills, in finance and management that they need? As someone that used to work on the shop floor, I mean, it would have been very difficult before I went back to college to go from climbing a telephone pole and running a wire to the next day managing a business. It's not necessarily a skill that you can just walk into and do one day. And so that's the idea of this office, is to try to give people that little bit of a head start. And then when you add into place the financial incentives, so again, some of the people we've met with were talking about they could have made double if they sold out to a traditional corporate model. But with the tax advantages of this employee ownership trust and of what would be available if my bill passes into law, it can level the playing field and make this more attractive, which as a matter of policy, which is what we look for in the legislature, it's certainly better for Massachusetts and certainly better for the communities we represent.
While you've been here, Mark, Paul, beg your pardon again, is anything again?
PM the evening.
PM the evening, PM the evening, not MP. You've visited a number of EOT owned companies that where the former owners have transferred ownership to a corporate ownership to a trust which holds those shares for the long-term benefit of employees. And I'd just be interested to see your perspective on what you've picked up from actually talking to some of these businesses and seeing them in operation in the UK.
Yeah, I actually picked up a lot of really great talking points, because when you're involved in the legislature, one of the things you need to do is persuasion. And so when you're thinking about, in Massachusetts alone, there'll be 6,000 bills filed in a 2-year session. So how do you get your idea to the front of the line? The more you can talk about, especially with firsthand experience, the better. So I thank you again for taking the time to bring me around and show me around with these businesses that you've had the opportunity to work with in the past. And so we went to 3 different companies, and they ranged widely in size. We had a company of 20 or fewer employees. We had a company of over 500, and we had a company of about 250. So very, very different models. And we also saw that they were each in a different place as far as the transition was actually happening. And they were each in a different place in terms of how the business operations were actually going. And so what I found, though, was regardless of size, regardless of how long the transition had occurred, and regardless of how well the business was doing, what was happening at each of them was there was a desire to preserve local jobs. And again, as a matter of policy, a government, that's very important, is how do we keep our jobs local and sustainable? They were all addressing the need for how do we transfer this business without it disappearing? How do we transfer this business in a way that's going to keep the people that help build this business with me? That was something I loved hearing, was owners of a business, entrepreneurs saying, I want to keep the people that help build this business with me employed into the future. And then the longer term vision that each of them had for the growth of the business. When we visited a printing shop and they were thinking about how do we innovate, one of the employees heard an idea for the future on the radio, something that they thought their company could also do and do better than anyone else, brought it to their employee trust, who then brought it to their board of directors. And now they are trying to get into this new line of work, and they're trying to use each of the employees, all 250 of them, as potential salespeople. So I mean, that's beautiful. That is the entire company sharing in prosperity, trying to share in the success. And so another one of the reasons why I've always cared about this idea. when I worked at Verizon, they used to give us a stock plan. And the idea was if you care about the stock, you care about the success of the company, you're an owner as well, that you're going to try to work harder. And you know what? It was true, but it was still limited because Verizon, and it was a great place to work, but it was a very, very big company and you felt like kind of like a number at times. So being part of the ownership team, even in a company of 500 people, I mean, I think that's just wonderful. I know it would motivate me to want to take an interest because when you know that the company itself is of course interested in profit and has the same chance of success as any other company, but it's not profit at the expense of the people that help build it. And that to me was really wonderful to see. So yeah, again, thank you for bringing me around. It was wonderful.
There have been other changes there, haven't there, in the United States recently? There's been legislation at the federal level to help employee ownership, something which at a time when the lack of bipartisan solutions is noticeable. It's an example where there has been one. Can you tell us a bit more about what has happened at the federal level?
Yeah, at the federal level, at the end of last year, 2018, there was a piece of legislation. It was originally called the Main Street Employee Ownership Act, but now is referred to as the Main Street Jobs Act. And that was passed into law. It was included in the defense spending bill of all things, but it was something that they could find common ground with Republicans, Democrats, and they could get the president to sign and not veto. And so the lead sponsors on this were senators and representatives from the state of New York. So you had Senator Kirsten Gillibrand and Representative Nydia Velasquez, and they were the leads on this. And what it does is it tries to change the way Small Business Administration loans will work in the United States. So right now, it would encourage what we call the Small Business Administration to be more flexible with lending to employee-owned businesses, worker cooperatives, ESOPs, that kind of thing. And SBA loans right now, they're up to $5 million available for small business to try to get a loan and try to, either expand or engage in a new market or any other type of business expense that may be necessary. But the best thing about this is that 85% of the loan is then insured by the government. And so opening this market to employee-owned businesses is going to put them on a more level playing field. And again, the idea is how do you make this model more attractive? It also would update Small Business Association lending practices to recognize that the employee-owned businesses might have a different growth curve, a different idea of what is success. But the good news is it's actually usually less of a risk when you go with an employee-owned business. The stat I saw was that only 2 out of every 1,000 employee-owned businesses actually defaults on a loan. So that's a pretty good risk we're taking. And then it also sets up some assistance programs from the Small Business Administrations that are very similar to what we've been talking about with the Massachusetts Office of Employee Involvement and Ownership. So at a federal level, they can work with, I think it's over 900 different organizations that exist like that, both private and government, throughout the United States.
If we can actually just for a moment compare things with the United States and the UK. In the UK, we are working with this legislation that came in about 5 years ago that allows a owner to sell their business to a trust that then holds those shares for the long-term benefit of employees as a whole. And the owner gets the benefit not only of seeing the business continue as they as their chief goal, but also gets a tax advantage that disposal to an EOT is free of capital gains tax. But of course, the owner has to wait for their money because it's only the company that's able to fund the consideration. Now, there are parallels with existing arrangements in the United States. There are things called ESOPs, and there's what sometimes is referred to as the 401k schemes, which have sort of similarities. I mean, Paul, I believe you yourself, when you were at Verizon, were a member of one of these schemes. Can you just tell me how it looks from the point of view of as an employee?
Yeah, a 401k is a section of the Internal Revenue Service tax code in the United States. And so what it does is it establishes that there are tax benefits for you and for your employer if you are given stock in the company, and if you are taking some of your money and investing it in the stock market as opposed to, going out and spending it. So if you invest in a 401k, at Verizon, I was lucky enough that they would actually match 82% of what I invested, up to, I think, 5%. And so that was all in company stock. And then what I could buy more company stock, or I could buy bonds. I could buy a lot of different things. And then the guarantee is that you will not take that money out, because if you take that money out early, there will be a penalty. You can take a loan against it and you pay yourself back. So it's a great program. It's certainly not, I don't think, a standalone pension, guarantee, but is a great supplement to other pension ideas and other ownership ideas. But an employee stock ownership plan is very similar to your employee ownership trust, in that a percentage of the company is owned by the workers themselves, and their governance document can declare how much you own. It can be based on how long you've worked there, what your responsibilities are, a lot of different things. And what we've found, another statistic, is that the average employee stock ownership plan participant in the United States has $119,691 in equity. So they have that extra bit of equity there waiting for them should they want to leave the company, or should they be ready to retire. And then cooperatives would be a company where every owner is is usually an equal partner in the business.
Going back to the experiences of looking at UK companies that have transitioned or are transitioning to employee ownership, one of the themes that does seem to come through is the difficulty of letting go. The owner who's built a business, who's been there a long time, sometimes finds it hard to make that transition, to give up and adapt from being, if you like, a dictator to being a facilitator or a moderator, or completely stepping away. I mean, that's not just a problem, I guess, for companies. It's a problem generally in the world. And I just wonder, Paul, do you think the United States is any better at solving that problem than the UK?
No, I think it's exactly the same. I mean, I think that's human nature. You've put a lot of time and effort into something, whether it's a business, whether it's politics, whether it's your kids' education. I mean, anything in the world you've been working on, building a house. And at some point, some people, I think, get so reliant on themselves that maybe they forget to turn to others. Others are actually, I think, looking for a way to get out and looking for a way to start relaxing and start enjoying the fruits of their labor. And so we saw different stages of that while we were here. I think the first business we toured, it seemed like the owner still had a pretty involved hand in the day-to-day operations, and they were going through a bit of a troubling time. And so I understand that need to feel like I have to see my business through this period of time. And then the second place we went, I think it was more of the middle ground. I think the owner was still involved, but he saw himself more as an advisor, as someone who's there to help steer them, offer advice, because the gentleman does have a great deal of expertise to offer, but also he had the trust that he's built with his employees over that time to recognize that they're gonna make the right decision. And then the third company went to, basically the owners had transitioned out, and the board and the employee trust was making a lot of the calls and really checking with the employees, each employee having almost a democracy on how each decision should be made. So yeah, it's tough, and it's going to be tough, but to me, I would want to know that there's a legacy, know that my business is going to continue, and then at some point you got to have confidence. I mean, even in what I do, we have staff, and it took me a long time to be able to trust my staff, and nothing they did, just because I'm so used to doing things. And so to be able to trust, to hand over work to them and accept that you can't do every single thing. And I mean, that's the entrepreneurial spirit. People start a business because they're driven, and you put a lot of effort into it, you put a lot of work into it, and so it's not easy to walk away. But ultimately, it needs to be done, and it needs to be done in a way that works for everybody. And I can't imagine, as someone owning a business that I would want it to just disappear after.
There's one question actually that I would, before we sort of finish, I would really like Paul to give his views on.
Sure.
Now, just to explain, there is another reason why Paul is in over from the United States at the moment. It's not just to do with understanding more about employee ownership here. As you may be aware, there is actually quite a big baseball game being played at the weekend. In fact, two. At the West Ham or the stadium, or what used to be the Olympic Stadium. A lot of eminent Bostonians and New York folk are coming over for this game. And so I'd just be interested to know from Paul how he thinks these matches will turn out.
I'm predicting the world champion Boston Red Sox are gonna pull out a victory. Hopefully 2 victories, definitely 1 victory. And it's gonna be exciting. It's the first time Major League Baseball has ever played a game in Europe. And so it's really, for me, it's a special experience to be able to come over here. And so when I heard about this, first I got into this lottery to win tickets. And you don't win, and win means the right to buy, by the way. It doesn't mean you get them for free. And so when I was able to get some tickets and secure some tickets and pay for them, I thought, who do I know in England? And I thought of you. And so I emailed you and I said, hey, are you interested? And you said you were. And when you were, I said, well, let's take advantage of it. Because I'm not the type of person that's going to fly across the ocean for 2 days. Let's make this a week worth of events. And so, yeah, it's going to be exciting. And hopefully people in the United Kingdom are going to see baseball and maybe think it's fun. I mean, I think baseball kind of derives from your cricket, and a game I've never seen, but I've heard of called Rounders is a forerunner to baseball. And we were talking about this earlier because you were showing me some cricket on the television. I can see how on the American frontier in the late 1700s, how that, which is very complex and very formal, I would almost say, how that turned into baseball, where you don't have a stadium, you don't have wickets, you don't have any of this fancy equipment, so just throw the ball and see if you can hit it and see what happens. So yeah, it should be fun.
Well, thank you so much, Paul.
You're very welcome.
It's been fascinating, and I'm sure much will come of this, because the opportunities for dialogue within companies and between legislatures, this issue of employee ownership is not going away. It is part of the solution to the problems that all advanced countries face, I think, in terms of getting engagement from people, from allowing democracy to continue and not die, as Mr. Putin seems keen that it should. So, much is at stake, actually, with employee ownership, as well as the future of jobs and individual businesses.
Right.
So I thank you again for coming, and thank you also for listening. Switch it off.